Hey everybody, welcome to the Home Care Forum podcast with your hosts, Sasha, Guillaume, and Emina Poricanin. This is season 7, Emina, if you are keeping track. And we have a special guest as we're approaching the start of legislative agenda. We know the what's being discussed in the fall is what finds its way to the floor of the legislature in January, and we have a special guest. Amina, bring us up to speed. Are you back in the States?
Maybe let's keep it a
Maybe.
mystery for
Yeah.
our listeners. No, just kidding. I am. I had a whirlwind summer. I forgot how many countries I hopped in and out of, some for less than 24 hours. I won't even try to remember at this point, but it's good to be back. Busy few weeks and months ahead of us. But let me just introduce our esteemed guest today, who's taken time out of his very, very busy schedule to be with us and share so much that he knows about home care with our listeners. We have Mordechai Wolhendler, who is one of the co-founders of the Home Care Powwow events and show that is widely attended by anybody that is anybody in home care in New York. And also the CEO of Glatt Consulting, where, as he will share with us, they really handle a lot and hold a lot of agency owners' hands through some challenging things. So, Mordechai, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us in the quote studio. How are you today?
Doing good. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm honored to be the first guest of the season. So looking forward to doing one of these with you guys.
Absolutely. We will have you back, I'm sure, many, many times. So, as we promised, this is a very conversational show that we do, and you do have a lot to talk to us about. So, I'm not even really sure where to begin. Let's talk about maybe the happy note here, the event. Your show is coming up in November. I personally always look forward to it. Sasha and I will be there doing an episode of this podcast at the show. We're looking forward to that.
You can't give it all the secrets right away. Come on. Leave some surprises there.
We are not going to share what we will be talking about, so that can certainly be the secret, and we will have guests, so that will stay a secret. But we will be there. I want to make sure that our listeners get the plug and the hint to attend. But I've always been amazed at how well attended it is. Everybody takes a lot of pleasure in just seeing people face to face. There's a lot of business, a lot of synergies that happen by just being in the same room. So, what can you share with us, being as it is September, you're still rolling out little teasers out there. What can you tell us about this year's event that's coming up?
So number one, I would say we're hoping that this year is going to be better than the previous years. It's hard to outdo yourself year after year, but it's one thing that we've, seen across the board has been that if you don't try to innovate and you don't try to keep it fresh, eventually it just gets stale and people stop attending. So we're trying to keep it that way. Doing some major changes this year. Number one, we moved it from a 1 day event to a 2 day event and actually have it jam-packed with sessions. Everything is actually on the website already. So, now, while we're doing the teasers, it's still everything is out there already. That we're looking forward to amazing energy, and there's been over 100 attendees that have actually signed up already. So, we're looking forward to this being even bigger than it's been in the past. And another major thing that we're excited about is that we've actually brought it back to New York. So we started year one was in New York, then we moved out of New York because we just couldn't find a venue that was large enough, and coming back to New York. So back home.
A lot of providers are facing what they have described as unprecedented, really, reimbursement cuts. Everybody is looking, and CDPAP obviously was devastating for a lot of providers. Do you have any concerns about the ability of people to be able to get away from their computers and just come and attend and enjoy? Again, I find a lot of value in being at the show. What kind of feedback are you getting just given the environment that we're in this year?
That's a great question. And what I'll say is kind of goes back to why do we create the show in the first place? What I've seen and the feedback that I've heard from other people has been that a lot of the association conferences and other events within the space are great when you're starting out in the business. And the first few years, you learn a lot, you do a lot, and it really is helpful. But after you've been in the business for 2, 3 years, you actually create your own circle of friends, I'm going to call them, and you get to know some of your competitors slash colleagues, and everyone has those 2, 3 people on speed dial that they call when they a new regulation comes out. How do we do this? How do we do that? And it kind of starts the whole conference starts becoming something where you don't need to attend as much and it's not as helpful as it was in the beginning. So this was about creating an event that was geared towards executives, creating an event that would strengthen conversations and relationships that they would use throughout the year. So it's very much focused on both networking as one, huge part of it, which is, very, very unique in terms of different conferences that we see. And the sessions that we do are always targeted towards executives and what we think is relevant to them. I view it as an investment in your business rather than it being taking time away from your business.
I was going to ask if this is a vendor-driven conference, and can you speak to that, if that is the correct way to describe it and how that differs from the other associations?
So I wouldn't say that it's vendor driven, number one. And number two, I wouldn't say it's not other associations. It's not a competition to an association in any shape or form. In fact, all the associations that typically have joined and been present. It's not about being vendor driven, it's about networking. And networking with vendors is a huge part of the industry. So a lot of the vendors have told me it's not that I'm coming because I feel like I'm going to be picking up clients necessarily there. It's a lot about it's the one day where I get to see all my clients, strengthen my relationships with them, touch base and see them. And there's just that human connection that we've, with all these Zoom calls and everything that's happening these days has been less and less and less. 20 years ago, there's such a thing as not seeing your clients. A lot of it was done in person, and now we're in a different world. So the fact that you have that one day where you can actually see all your clients is very, very helpful. So it's not that it's necessarily vendor driven, it's much more that it's networking driven rather than just being educational.
There's this often perception, and I feed into it myself. I'm guilty of it. It's the providers against the state, right? Do you have the state representatives coming? And if not, is that something that you may want to consider doing in the future? Because often the providers are frustrated. New York is a horribly bureaucratic machine. And you go to other states, and it's so easy to get someone from the Department of Health on a call to guide you through a licensure question, for example. And in New York, you can't get anything answered. Forget about a complaint or an actual issue getting addressed in a timely fashion. So there is this need from providers to have more access to the regulators and get actual feedback without resorting to hiring a lobbyist or a lawyer. So are the regulators going to be at this year's show? And if not, is that something you're looking to do in the future?
At this year's event, not as of today. What may change in the next few, but by then I don't know. There's hesitations about bringing the state to an event like this. There's been some back and forth as to whether or not it's helpful or not. So what I'll say is the following: the one area of within, let's call it the home care side of things. The one area that I feel is just like some of the other states and what we see with different health departments is the NHGD and TBI waiver. They're a lot more receptive, a lot more open to talking to people and providers and helping out. So we do have Tom Reese, who's one of the directors with the Bureau of Long-Term Care and the Medicaid waiver. So he is joining us. He did reach out to me saying that potentially he may need to change it to virtual, but as of today, we're hoping that he will be able to make it. Either way, we will have something, and they're going to be updating us because there's been a ton of changes within the waiver programs. It's seen exponential growth, and there's been a lot of different issues that have come out of that between cost neutrality and other budget related items. And he'll be doing a lot of what's actually happening on a state level and talking about it. And then we also have the Westchester Event Living Center. Their executive team is going to be joining us. They are the RRDC for the New York City and Lower Hudson Valley region. So they're going to be doing a provider town hall, to talk about the issues and changes that are happening on more the local level. We try to do what we can to bring in relevant state representatives, but not always is that so easy. What we have a little bit focused on in the same vein has been bringing a lot of the managed long-term care plans to be there, because that is very much a huge part of what they do and opens up conversations. And we've been pretty successful with having them join us. They're happy to be there. And, similar to what we were talking about vendors earlier, they have that day or two where they can actually meet with a lot of the providers that they work with.
Thank you for bringing up that point about the MLTCs participating and being very good about doing so. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation with them this year, given all of the cuts The consolidations that we have seen over the last few years are really coming to fruition. And so there's more of a squeeze on rates, and the providers are really struggling on how to differentiate themselves and keep their rates. The rates are all over the place, right? Some are getting rate reduction letters that are significant. Others are getting small rate cuts, and then there's others who don't get any rate cuts at all. So the providers are really being challenged on how to preserve their reimbursements. And the MLTCs, the payors themselves, they've got their own set of challenges with New York State as well, that they're trying to pass on to providers, as of course a business probably would, right? We all pass on costs and responsibilities down the funnel. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation with them on the panels this year. If they're so brave enough to keep their commitment to come to the home care show, Mordechai.
Well, I would love if we had reserved seating for them up front at the podcast taping so we can ask them directly
Ooh.
for our listeners about these rate
That
cuts.
sounds like a threat, not an invitation.
No, no, that's invitation, please. Invitation.
Is there one particular home care show guest that you're really looking forward to this year, more so than before? They're all valuable. I understand that. But is there a session in the show this year that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, unquestionably, the Home Care Forum podcast live is, hands down the winner.
Oh, you took
But
the easy answer. Come on. Aside from us, is there anybody in particular for our listeners like that they should be looking forward to as well?
So there are a number of interesting sessions. So as a starting point, we are bringing in Marty Simpson, who is a comedian, to actually be our MC. Trying to keep things different, so he'll be there, and we hope that it's going to be slightly more entertaining than just, the sessions. So he's one person to look out for. So we have some panels, then there's a few workshops, and then there's some demos. I can give you a quick overview of what they look like, and then just so listeners can have an idea of what to expect. So number one is Home Care State of the Union, where things are at both on a local level and a national level. So we have some people coming in for that to talk about that, and it's always an interesting topic to understand and see what's going on. Nationally, I think particularly right now, the big thing to look out for is whether or not the Standards Act is going to allow for overtime, and what that would look like, and how I think New York is going to treat that once we get there. That's going to be interesting to see. Although, I'm sure there's a lot of states that have their own rulings on this, so I don't know how much of a difference in reality the FLSA changes will have should that go through. So that's one interesting conversation. Then we have, of course, the NHDBI waivers that we spoke about. We have a presentation about the CMS guide model, and what opportunities are today for home care agencies with respite care, and what that would look like for them. And then beyond that, the main focus of the event really is on a lot of the AI. So, I know you're hosting a podcast now on AI in the workplace and what that looks like. So there's a lot of conversation around AI, and that's something that if people are not doing that yet, they really need to be looking at how they can utilize it within home care and how it can be helpful for them for, operationally. So we have a number of live demos of actual AI products to see what do we have that's available today within AI. And then we have some conversations about what to expect in the future. So we're actually going to do a panel with all the EMR systems. So we have Exchange, like your Access, Visiting Aid, doing sitting together on a panel and talking about what do they have today in their systems, and what can we expect in the future, what type of adoptions are going to be coming to it, so people understand. And then the third aspect is we're going to have some workshops that are geared towards executive level. We have the Dale Carnegie Institute come in and do a leadership workshop. We have another one done by Verve for bottlenecking and how to try to identify what behaviors are actually causing bottlenecks and how to avoid some of that. Then we have EOS and talking about how that can be implemented. So it's a few different things that are happening, and different things will talk to different people. So, we tried gearing whatever we're doing towards people within the space, not keeping it specific to New York, more broader than that. That's where we're at.
All right, great. And now transitioning a little bit to Glatt Consulting and your work there. I'm sure most of our listeners have heard of Glatt, but for those who have not, can you tell us a little bit initially about what services you provide?
So thank you for that opportunity to introduce what we do. So GlattHealth is a consulting firm focused on home care and adult daycare and some of the other home-based services. There's three core services that we provide. One is ongoing support. So agencies that have to do any type of communication with the Department of Health or compliance issues, they're trying to figure out new regulations, what happened, where are things at, any type of reporting that has to get done, filings, change of address, change of ownerships, and cost reporting, all of these things that come up every once in a while. And supporting them with that. There's also new applications. So if somebody wants to get into the startup phase, going into a new location, a new area. We spoke about the waivers earlier. Somebody wants to apply for the waivers, doing all those new applications. The third stage is really somebody who's looking potentially to get out of the business. So we have an arm that does mergers and acquisitions. So we deal all the time with buyers and sellers, and that's in a nutshell what we do.
And in that regard, as far as getting out of the business or entering the business, is your role as a consultant or a broker or both?
So a little bit of both. We have different people within the firm doing different things. So it really depends on what the client is looking for.
Hmm. As you know, I do a lot of corporate transactions and I can represent either the buyer or the seller, but I cannot do both. And I very clearly stay out of brokering a deal. But it's amazing to me when there's no broker involved, some of those non-legal questions that come to me, and I'm always reminded of your services, and I wish there was someone like you that would be guiding, again, either the buyer or the seller on some of these more business terms, some of these life decisions, like um, oh, well, what do I do afterwards? After I, cash in. It's like, I don't know. I am not a therapist. I'm just kidding. I love all of my clients, and please do not hesitate to ask me anything that's on your mind. But I can't possibly answer that type of stuff correctly. And I'm so glad when there is a broker who has done so many of these deals who's able to say, well, this is the next chapter. Or, here, I have another opportunity. If you're done with home care, we do assisted living. Here's this. Roll your money over. There may be some tax advantages to doing so.
I would say we were kind of unique in that regard, in the sense that you have your, business brokers who focus solely on brokerage. You have people who are in completely different spaces and just, think they can do a quick flip or whatever. And then you have an entity like us. We're here not just, we're focused on our industry rather than being focused on just the job. So we're doing different things, and there's different people within the firm who can assist with different things. So it's not coming to us, I'm just doing brokerage. There's a lot more to that, and a lot more history and a lot more history and understanding of the space itself.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you would also help prepare a client who is looking to sell. A lot of times they don't really understand that they would need to clean up their policies, procedures, and things under the hood because the buyer coming in is going to want to do due diligence. So a seller entity would benefit from your services to advise them, here are the due diligence items you can reasonably expect to be asked about, and here's how we should clean them up. So that is something that you do with your sellers, correct?
I definitely try. It's actually interesting to see how many sellers come to us and say, I have 500 patients, bring me an offer. And we're like, that's not how it works.
Right.
There's so many details that a buyer is looking at when they're trying to evaluate your business. And very often with those types of deals where, okay, you get an offer, they'll send you a letter of interest, or we're gonna give you X amount of dollars, and then they do the due diligence. And the due diligence 98% of the time will come back with, it's not exactly how we thought it was when we started. There's always hiccups, there's always things that are uncovered, and there's always things that are different there. So they'll go and renegotiate the deal. And sometimes it's a few months in at that point where you've invested time and energy and effort into one buyer, and then they'll walk away from the table because, I'm not going to give you what I originally offered you because your agency is not what you represented it to be. So it's very often much better to do it on the front end and have everything taken care of and lined up, and then potentially even to work with you on making sure that some of those issues are taken care of before a buyer sees the issues that actually are present in the business today.
I think you're talking about surprises. Nobody wants to be surprised by their client, right? You don't want to work with a client who's hiding a huge liability that could affect the price down the line. And I'm always concerned about that as well. I will say a word of caution, like if you are smelling something like that, and I'm sure you do this already, but you make sure a lawyer is involved. So any discussions about potential liabilities that may have to be disclosed, those are being discussed under attorney-client privilege. And the client is not just telling you, oh, look at these bones. We buried a body here. Once they take over our office, they'll find it. I'm just, using an extreme example, but if you sense that those conversations are forthcoming from your client, make sure a lawyer is involved before those conversations should really go into any detailed level. You've been involved, to my understanding, with some really large players coming into the New York space in home care. Without naming any names, can you just say, because everybody dreams about being bought out by a private equity firm, right? And getting those top multipliers on what they believe is their price. For those listeners who are hoping at some point to retire and have a nice nest egg by selling their agency, is there anything you could say now about how they should be structuring or planning their business for that end of career sell cash out day?
Can I add to that as well
Sure.
to differentiate between uh, maybe an equity buyer versus another home care agency buyer, somebody who's familiar with the industry? Is there a difference there at all?
Loaded question. Well, we'll try. I'll start with this, and this kind of goes to Sasha's point. When you're looking at a home care agency, there's three primary ways that buyers are looking and evaluating a business. Number one would be straight up EBITDA. EBITDA meaning what is the actual amount of money that this company makes after some of the ad backs and so on. So that is very, very essential to the conversation. How much money the business makes is always relevant. And very often, if your finances are not documented properly, it becomes very difficult to actually know what was real and what was not. So, every business owner has their way of doing things and running their business. However, they have that set up, they do. There's always different things that when you're looking at straight up tax return is not going to reflect the actual business. So making sure you have your finances in order is very important. And it becomes important as well for when you're doing cost reporting because all the allocations and everything has to get done. It sometimes gets to be very, very complicated, especially when you have a parent entity that's managing multiple different agencies and serving certain functions and how that all gets done. So the amount of money the business makes is crucial, and the more money the business makes, the more it's going to be worth when looking at that evaluation strictly. So sometimes you can look at it as, we're just saving $1 over here, but in reality, that dollar can, when selling your business, becomes $5. And obviously 100,000 becomes 500,000. So there's things of that nature to look at. The second way of evaluating the business is an existing operator. If you're an existing operator and you can take a look at, okay, if I take that business and take those patients and all that they have and put it into my existing infrastructure, how much money will I make? So I don't care how much money they're making. I care about how much money I'm making and evaluating the business that way. The third way is kind of people who are looking to get into the industry. And there's just a barrier to entry. You can't just create an agency because of certificate of need process and whatnot. You have to get in somehow. And this is not just specific to any state. Even when there's not a certificate of need, you want to get into a different state. You want to figure out what are the nuances of that state. Every state, every locality, there's always nuances to it. So sometimes there's a barrier of entry. I'm buying an existing agency and saying, I know I'm overpaying for it, but I'd rather overpay for it and have a turnkey operation today than start from scratch and start figuring out what needs to be done and do things wrong and then find out later when I'm, like get penalties and so on.
So, Mordechai, as I alluded to earlier when we were talking about the show, there are so many challenges happening right now with just the restructuring. The CDPAP changes and the transition to PPL has really forced a lot of agencies to reevaluate their bottom line, their numbers. We're still waiting to see the full impact of all of that. Can you just talk a little bit to our listeners about your experience and what you're seeing in the last few months between the reimbursement changes, with the threat of an additional LICSA RFO or a new RFO, sorry, a moratorium. There's always those things. The NHTD program, as you said, has its own challenges and is probably going to be squeezed in the future even more by New York State. The plans, it's getting a lot harder to get a decent rate because of changes and their own challenges. At the federal level, we've got, the Trump administration really trying to hack and reduce Medicaid spending generally. Um, I do think it's a really bad time for the providers. I'm struggling to be optimistic, but can you talk to us without disclosing any names, obviously, but what are your clients worried about these days? What are they coming to you on a consultancy basis and thinking about, and as how to get out of all of this?
Very, very difficult time within the industry. And not just for providers, this goes across the board, I'm going to say. It has a trickle-down effect on everybody. I see what it did to my business in terms of our New York revenue, and I know what a lot of the other vendors are saying, and it goes across the board where people right now are really, really struggling to just cover their day-to-day expenses, and anything that's going to be any extra dollar that they're spending is something that they want to get rid of. And people are really, really struggling to the point where, people are telling me my bank accounts have never, ever looked this way in the industry. It's definitely difficult to be optimistic for New York right now. However, New York has seen many, many ups and downs, and I am very hopeful that we will eventually get out of this. I don't know if it's ever been what it is today. And I don't think the state even knows how bad it actually is what I'm going to say. Obviously, they understand the impact that CDPAP had, and they were very, very much okay with that and wanted that. But I don't think they understand what LICSAs go through. I don't think they really grasp what's actually happening day to day on within a LICSA. It's very much a time where I think it's very important to gather together as an industry and try to do advocacy, not against DOH necessarily, but together with them, making sure they understand what the status is today of an agency, how things are actually flowing, and what reimbursement rates need to look like. One of the challenges that New York specifically has is that there's no mandated reimbursement rate. We do see, the state puts out what the expectation should be and what they think the rate should be, but that has zero trickle-down effect. The plans can do whatever they want. And that's something that is extremely important, and the state needs to understand what that actually means, because instead of providers getting the basic amount that they need to get, you see different size providers and so on and so forth getting different amounts of money. And sometimes you have agencies who are doing very, very quality work. They may be very small though, and sometimes they're better because they're smaller, and unfortunately it has the opposite effect for them where they're getting paid less instead of getting paid more. What I'm hearing and seeing from New York is a lot of people being afraid of what's going to come and what's going to trickle down. A lot of people saying they do not think their agencies are sustainable as it stands today, and people looking to either consolidate or get out of it somehow. So people looking to sell, people looking for find another company that's the same size as me, let's merge and let's bring down our expenses, because if I'm going to be an agency, and not even just the small ones, we have agencies who are I'm going to say around the 1,000 patient mark, who feel like right now my agency is not sustainable long term. I have to merge with another company that's going to be similar size. And we've seen some pretty large agencies actually merging with others. So it's very, very interesting times to keep up with what's happening in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's been this way, and this was not expected, other than as a result of what's happening on the federal level, because in times of recession, our industry is usually solid. Everything points to that. It feels like a recession, but it's not, right? The stock market is holding on. the layoffs or firings, it's happening, but not at a pace where we've fallen off a cliff. So it just everything's tenuous. And that benefit of additional staff that we would potentially be able to pick from is not available to us as it would be or had been in the past, the 2008 time frame. And the cuts are just, it gives you that sense of insecurity about the future. You're trying to reduce expenses all around. And those who are able to do it or who have done it successfully, especially the smaller agencies, you put that 1,000 number out there. Yeah, that's where you should feel pretty secure as an agency.
And the crazy thing is, this is very specific to New York, those numbers. Anywhere else in the country, and 1,000 agents, 1,000 patients is humongous. But for New York, it's like, there's just obviously we're talking about downstate, not necessarily upstate, but even upstate, you have some very, very large agencies, relative to the rest of the nation.
Right.
I had to give you that fair access, that shout out there.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, that also is why we are looking to launch, or we have launched Fair Access initiative, right? It's our association. We've been speaking about it. If you haven't gotten an invitation to join us and be fair, right? That's our kind of motto: be fair, join us and be fair. We're asking the federal and states to be fair with us in the industry, and we don't want to confuse it with the fair pay. It's not that. We are that's one of the issues or topics to be dealt with, but Fair Access Initiative is an industry association that was formed in response to what we see is lacking in the industry as far as our response and getting like minds around to actually get something done. So we'll continue to speak about it, and please reach out, whether it's on LinkedIn, and we'll share information with you. We can do presentations as we're continuing to do this fall. All right, with that said, that is all for us this week. Mordechai, thank you for joining us. You are a recognized voice in the industry. In the chats, you're always helpful in answering questions where you can. So we definitely appreciate that. Emina, glad to be back with you on season 7. Mordechai, we will see you and our listeners at the Home Care Show this November 18th, 19th, correct?
Yep, that is correct. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Emina. Thank you, Sasha. And see you guys.
Great.
Thanks,
This has
everybody.
been the Home Care Forum podcast with your hosts, Sasha Guillaume and Emina Poricanin. Have a good one.